He was just a single dad working the night shift as a janitor at a top tech company. No one looked at him twice. Until one night, he quietly saved a $100 million system with a few lines of code and a heart the world had overlooked. But what the CEO did next shook the entire company. This isn't just a story about brilliance. It's a powerful lesson in humanity. If you believe everyone deserves to be heard, like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that touches the heart. As the glass door clicked shut, the world seemed to forget he existed, except for the floor still holding the warmth of his hands. On the 27th floor of Coltech, a tech giant in Boston's AI industry, there was a familiar sight. A tall, slightly hunched man quietly pushing a mop down the hallway. No one asked his name. No one noticed that he was always on time, always worked the night shift, and always greeted the front desk with the same gentle line, "Full moon tonight, don't miss it." His name was Thomas Ray, 48 years old, widower, night janitor from 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. In a worn gray uniform and a faded baseball cap, he fit the image of an invisible night guard in every office worker's mind. No one knew that after each shift, he returned to a tiny South End apartment, woke up his 10-year-old daughter, made her a warm bottle of milk, checked her homework, and then caught a few hours of sleep before repeating it all again. The only person who'd ever spoken more than 3 sentences to Thomas was a retired janitor who once told him, "You know, a man like you should be sitting in an air-conditioned office typing code, not dragging a mop bucket." Thomas had just smiled, eyes distant. "I used to sit there," he said. "Now I'd rather mop a floor clean than write dirty code." No one understood what he meant. No one cared to. Because at a place like Coltech, if you don't have a title, you're invisible. That fateful Monday night, the company's AI system crashed hard after a major upgrade. Engineers were sprinting around like ER doctors, urgent and exhausted. Red graphs flashed on every screen, error logs scrolled like runaway trains, and the CEO was roaring from the boardroom while the IT floor sat under a thundercloud of panic. Thomas walked past the row of engineer desks, mop in hand, watching the young techs claw at their keyboards in frustration. Then his eyes caught something. A printed technical diagram left behind on a desk, covered in frantic red scribbles, abandoned in the chaos. And in that moment, something in him stirred. A slight tremble in his fingertips, a corner of memory long buried, a structure in the code that was familiar. Too familiar. He stood still for a long beat, caught between 2 versions of himself, the janitor of today and the once brilliant engineer who had written that very kind of algorithm back before he lost his wife, his faith, and chose silence over sorrow. Then he set the mop aside, leaned in, and began to read. They called it an emergency meeting. But really, it was just another stage for egos to shout over each other, while no one actually listened. The main boardroom at Coltech was so large even a sigh echoed like a statement. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls reflected the glittering lights of Boston at night, painting a surreal skyline. But no one in that room was in the mood to enjoy the view. Every eye was fixed on one man, Derek Cole, 34, the youngest CEO in the company's history. He sat back in a sleek leather chair, gripping a computer mouse like he could squeeze the error out of existence. His jaw was sharp, his suit flawlessly tailored, but his eyes burned with frustration mixed with something close to panic. "The problem isn't the idea," Derek snapped. "The idea was solid. It's your execution that failed." Across the massive table, engineers, consultants, and department heads exchanged glances. One opened their mouth to speak, then thought better of it. No one wanted to be the next name on the growing list of silent terminations. 3 senior experts had already been let go in the past week without warning. The official reason? Lack of vision. The project they were working on was Derek's pride and his obsession, an artificial intelligence system capable of interpreting user emotions in business environments. If it worked, it could redefine customer service, retail, even healthcare. But right now, it kept crashing under real-world data, like a machine too intelligent to cope with reality. A single system error is manageable, but we're looking at over $100 million at risk, the VP of Finance murmured, as if saying the number too loud might bring the ceiling down. Derek shot up from his seat. "I don't care who fixes it. I just want a solution. Right now." He stormed out of the room, striding like a man commanding a battlefield. But behind the glass doors, only silence remained. In a shadowed corner of the 27th floor hallway, Thomas was bent over, wiping up a coffee spill left by a careless engineer. He didn't look up, but he heard everything. Not out of curiosity, just experience. He'd sat through meetings like that before, long enough to know when someone says, "My idea is right," they're usually one step away from a mistake no one has the guts to stop. And at that exact moment, the IT room's monitors lit up red again. A new error alert. More critical. Data misalignment, recursive logic loops, forced system shutdown. In the hushed midnight of a glass tower built on code and ego, the only things that stirred were the warning chimes and the quiet footsteps of a janitor tracing the fault lines of a memory that was slowly stitching itself back together. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble always left a trail, and a man who once built systems couldn't ignore a broken one forever. That night, Coltech felt like a tired machine. The 27th floor hallway fell into a hush after 1 a.m. The lights dimmed to power-saving mode, casting a faint glow over the glass walls and empty chairs. The IT room was still open, but the last engineer had left with slumped shoulders and a half-eaten snack. On the desk sat a cold cup of coffee and a printed system diagram, slashed with red ink like dried blood. Thomas stepped in, same as always. No one greeted him. He didn't need them to. He popped in his cassette headphones, an ancient artifact to the kids in this building, and let Bach's symphony ease into his ears like a sedative. After wiping down the rows of desks, he noticed the abandoned diagram. His eyes landed on one specific section, the behavioral data analysis flow. 1, 2, 3 seconds. Then he took off the headphones and sat down. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes lit up in a way they hadn't in years. The code, though written in modern syntax and polished with new AI libraries, was built on a logic structure he knew all too well. It was almost identical to a system he had designed 15 years ago, back when passion fueled every keystroke, in a forgotten side project no one cared to remember. But this blueprint had a flaw, not a massive one, just enough to make the entire system misread input data, a misplaced inference loop causing recursive analysis that would never stabilize. A small mistake, but in a deep learning AI system, it was fatal. Thomas sighed, deep, long, worn. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the red pen he always carried, not for code, but for marking scuffed floors and missed spots. Tonight, he used it to circle the flaw. And then he paused. This isn't my job. That sentence echoed in his mind like a wall. He remembered the last time he stepped in on a project he wasn't invited to, and how it ended with him quietly walking away from a job he loved after his wife's hospital bills were denied by the company's own health insurance. Slowly, he stood up. The red pen sat still beside the diagram. Then, carefully, he placed a blank sheet of paper over the printout. In neat, deliberate handwriting, he wrote, "Inference function nested in the wrong sequence. Suggest checking the loop at step 3. If incorrect, forgive the curiosity." No name, no signature. Then he mopped the floor again, meticulously, and walked out of the room as if he had never been there. But that printout was exactly where it needed to be. People expect a hero to arrive in the light, but sometimes he just quietly walks into a dark room and types a few lines of code. 3 a.m., the Coltech building was deep in sleep. Only the soft hum of air vents, the lazy crawl of the elevator between floors, and the faint blue glow from the server room remained. Thomas stood there, alone. His employee badge didn't unlock the IT department's main door, but he didn't need to go that far. A workstation near the exit was still logged in. The night shift engineer had likely been too exhausted to shut everything down. A line of code was still running. An error, again. A recursive loop. Thomas sat down. His hand settled on the mouse, gave it a gentle click. The screen blinked. System halted. Recursive conflict detected. He stared at the message for a long moment, not because he didn't understand, but because he understood it too well. His eyes dropped to the note he'd left the night before, still resting beside the keyboard. No one had folded it. No one had checked. Maybe they thought it was a joke. From the janitor. Thomas let out a quiet sigh. He took the mouse, opened the logs, and began to trace through the code. No Google, no AI assistant, just muscle memory, like a craftsman who still remembered every brick he once laid down decades ago. And then he saw it. A sentiment analysis function had been mislabeled in the training model. Instead of learning from real emotional responses, the system had been fed simulated reactions, causing the AI to mirror patterns of delusion. Smart, but disconnected from reality. All it took was adjusting one value, deleting one line, rewriting 3 more. He did it. No trembling hands, no need to double check. Finally, he typed the last command, Python run diagnostics mode equals live. The screen paused for a few seconds, then turned green. Clean graphs, no errors, no warnings. The system auto-logged a recognition message, process completed, error resolved. He printed the log, clipped it to the old sticky note, added one more line. Error likelihood 98%. Root cause, flawed loop logic and emotional architecture. Recommend full submodel audit. Still no signature. He shut down the computer, wiped the keyboard with a sanitizing cloth like he always did. Then picked up his mop and walked away, as if he'd never touched a thing. The sun had yet to rise, but a breeze whispered through the hallway of the 27th floor. And in that moment, no one knew that a $100 million system had just been saved by a man the entire company had overlooked for the past 4 years. Not everyone celebrates when the truth comes out, especially when it comes from a place they'd rather forget. The next morning, something felt off at Coltech, as if an old machine had suddenly started running smoothly again after nights of groaning. Engineers arrived unusually early. Word had spread the system had been stable, flawlessly so, from 3 a.m. until sunrise without a single error. Derek, the CEO, walked into the office at 7:15 a.m., his earliest appearance in 3 months. He immediately summoned the tech team. "Who touched the system last night?" he asked, his tone sharp with suspicion. Eyes darted, shoulders shrugged. No one knew. No one confessed. There were no sent emails, no logged tickets, no trace of a patch or update in the system records. Then Mia, a young intern, found something. A log file recorded at 3:12 a.m., quietly sitting on the server. Next to it on the desk was a neatly printed report detailing the exact lines of corrected code, the flawed structure in the machine learning model, and a handwritten note in tidy print. Logical error in emotional loop architecture. Recommend full audit of submodels. No name, no signature, no trace. Derek's brows furrowed. He didn't believe in miracles. He believed in control, in logic, in people, and whoever had done this clearly knew exactly what they were doing. "Pull the security footage from the 27th floor," he ordered, from 2:30 to 3:30 a.m. 30 minutes later, the security team brought up a grainy video clip. It showed a man in a janitor's uniform sitting at a workstation, scanning the screen, typing a few lines of code, then printing a document and quietly walking away. There was no mistaking it. It was him. Thomas Ray. The room went dead silent, like someone had just slammed shut an invisible door. A young engineer whispered, "That was him? But he's just the janitor?" Another murmured, "This has to be unauthorized. Who let him touch the system?" Derek crossed his arms, eyes locked on the video. His emotions twisted, part shock, part irritation. Not because Thomas had saved the system, but because he'd done what none of the 6-figure engineers could. "Keep this quiet," Derek said, his voice ice cold. "For now." He walked out, leaving behind a room full of stunned stares and a strange, creeping sense of unease, as if their faith in titles, degrees, and reputations had just cracked a little. Meanwhile, downstairs in the janitor's closet, Thomas was tightening the handle on a loose mop. He had no idea he'd just become the eye of a storm, not because he did something wrong, but because he did something right. Too right. Not everyone who walks away does so in failure. Some leave glory behind, simply because they can't bear to watch it destroy what they once loved most. Derek Cole stepped into the private security room where Thomas Ray sat waiting. He'd been called up to the 28th floor, the executive level, for the first time in his 4 years at Coltech. No escort, no announcement, and he didn't need one. Thomas sat quietly in the leather chair, hands clasped together. He wasn't nervous, but he wasn't calm either. The warm overhead light caught the salt and pepper streaks in his hair. His janitor uniform was clean, pressed, like he was heading into a board meeting, not a disciplinary review. Derek sat across from him, eyes narrowing. "You know why I brought you up here, don't you?" Thomas nodded gently. "I assume it's because I fixed the system error without permission." His voice carried no apology, no pride either. Derek leaned back in his chair. "So tell me, who are you really?" Thomas sat silent for a moment, as if weighing whether the answer even mattered. Then he spoke, slowly, his voice low and worn, like an old radio playing in the middle of the night. I used to be the lead engineer at a startup in Denver, Novotech. We were developing an emotional learning model for medical devices, AI that could help doctors better understand their patients' psychological states. That project, it was my life's work. Derek straightened in his seat. Novotech. That name hadn't crossed his mind in years. Coltech had acquired it a decade ago, only to shelve its technology for being impractical. Thomas nodded slightly. When my wife was diagnosed with cancer, I worked around the clock to complete the trial phase. She was the first patient to use our AI system to help her cope with post-chemo anxiety. His voice caught. Then, after a moment, he continued. But insurance refused to cover it. The project was scrapped. Novotech was sold, and I lost her, the week my daughter turned 10. The air froze. Derek said nothing. Thomas simply looked out the window behind him, where Boston gleamed like a city that didn't believe in grief. You didn't apply to be an engineer again? Derek asked, quieter than before. Thomas gave a faint smile, like he was hearing an old, familiar question. I stopped believing in sitting around boardrooms talking about artificial intelligence, when I couldn't save the one woman I loved with all the real intelligence I had. Then he added, without bitterness, only calm. Being a janitor's not so bad. At least I know exactly when the job's done. And floors never pretend to understand me. Derek lowered his head. Not because he lost the argument, but because in the silence of a janitor, he saw the echo of a man who once stood at the top, broke in half, but never collapsed. There are people who don't need a title to know their worth. But it's those very people who force the world to rethink how it measures human value. 3 days after the quiet meeting with Thomas, something began to shift at Coltech. Not just because the system had stabilized, but because rumors were spreading like wildfire. The person who saved the $100 million project wasn't a lead engineer, but the night janitor. At first, there were scoffs and whispers. Must be a mix-up. Word is he used to be an engineer, but come on, if he was that good, why is he mopping floors? But those who'd read the logs, the ones who had wrestled with that maddening code, said nothing. Because the fix wasn't just correct, it was elegant, precise, written like someone who knew the system better than the team that built it. After days of reflection, Derek, a young CEO not known for displays of humility, did something rare. He called an unscheduled all-hands internal meeting to publicly recognize someone who didn't even appear on the company org chart. For the first time, the executive boardroom on the 28th floor filled with not just leadership and engineers, but doormen, security guards, and custodial staff, people who had never once been invited past that threshold. Thomas was asked to stand in front of them all. He wore a plain white shirt, the only one in his closet still crisp. His gaze was steady. He didn't shrink. But in every step he took was the quiet strength of someone who understood that spotlights don't illuminate souls. Derek stepped forward and took the mic. His usual cool demeanor softened as he began. Last week, our system was on the brink of total failure, but the person who saved it wasn't on the engineering team. He holds no official title. He doesn't have a PhD. He's the man many of us never even bothered to learn the name of. He's our janitor. And all eyes turned to Thomas. Derek continued, "We'd like to invite Mr. Thomas Ray to serve as honorary advisor on ethics and human-centered technology, a new role, one we've never had at Coltech, not because of prestige, but because of his perspective from the places we forgot to look down to." The entire room fell silent. A few people clapped slowly. Then gradually the applause spread, not like cheers, but like awakening, a recognition long overdue, but genuine. Thomas just smiled, gently, then stepped up to the mic. "I'm not much of a speaker, but if you need someone to remind you that technology should serve people, not replace compassion, then I accept." His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for everyone to hear. And in that moment, no one saw Thomas as the janitor anymore. They saw a human being, and that changed everything. Sometimes, life introduces us to a teacher in the most unexpected form, and once it happens, you never look at the world the same way again. After the recognition ceremony, the name Thomas Ray slowly became a familiar presence at Coltech, not as a loud, inspiring figure, but as a quiet force that made people pause and rethink how they saw others. Gone were the cold, polite nods as he walked down the hall. Now, young engineers stopped to greet him by name. Someone offered to buy him coffee. A shy intern once asked, "Sir, would you mind taking a quick look at my code?" Thomas always smiled, never rushed. He didn't teach like some grand expert. He taught like an uncle, patient, gentle, always asking questions that helped others see the answer for themselves. He never fixed the code for them, but everyone knew he always saw the error first. Derek changed too. He started showing up earlier, staying later, not to yell in boardrooms, but to walk the halls, checking in on staff from the smallest departments, maintenance, reception, logistics. During an internal interview broadcast across the company network, the host asked, "Mr. Cole, what led you to change how you've been running the company lately?" Derek looked straight into the camera without hesitation. "A man who once mopped the floors in my building did something our entire team of top engineers couldn't." But he didn't ask for anything in return. No title, no raise. He only asked me one question. "Who do you think technology should serve first?" He paused, then added, "I realized I'd been leading from a place of fear of losing control, instead of trust in people. I measured talent by degrees, not by character. And I learned something. The person who understands the value of technology best might just be the one it forgot." The interview went viral across social media. Some called it a quiet revolution. Young CEOs everywhere began asking themselves, "Am I overlooking someone in my organization?" At Coltech, a small conference was held titled "The Human Behind the Code." The keynote speaker was Thomas Ray. He spoke briefly. "If you ask me how to fix a broken system, I'd say, start by listening to the person who's never invited to speak." Down front, Derek sat in the first row. His eyes never left the stage. And in that moment, the man once known as Coltech's most arrogant CEO was simply a student, learning the most important lesson of his life. Some seeds are planted in silence, only to grow into something even the sower never expected. The small apartment in South End wasn't anything special. 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, walls slightly faded with time. But every evening after 7 p.m., the warm yellow light from the kitchen and the soft clacking of keyboard keys from the study corner turned it into a world that felt full. Lily Ray, 10 years old, sat in front of the old computer Thomas had saved up for a year to buy her for her birthday. The screen flickered a bit, the spacebar sometimes stuck, but she treasured it like gold. Because in her young mind, it wasn't just a computer. It was a bridge between her and her dad. The man who, no matter how tired, always asked the same question each night. "So what did you discover today?" Tonight was no different. Lily turned, eyes bright. "Daddy, I made a chatbot. It doesn't understand everything yet, but it already says hi to me." Thomas laughed, walking over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Really? Then maybe tomorrow I'll ask it to remind you to brush your teeth." They both burst out laughing. No one in the neighborhood knew Thomas was the man who fixed a $100 million system. But they knew him as the dad who walked his daughter to school on time, the one who held an umbrella for the old flower vendor when the wind picked up, the man who never raised his voice, even though life had often treated him unfairly. And now, with Lily, the only piece of family he had left in his small world, showing interest in programming, Thomas didn't teach her like a professional. He simply sat beside her, quietly offering, "Think about this. How would your chatbot respond if the person it's talking to is sad, but doesn't say so?" Lily thought long and hard, then nodded. "So, it has to learn how to feel things, right?" Thomas smiled, nodded. "That's right. You've just understood something most people spend a lifetime trying to figure out." That weekend, Coltech hosted a STEM event for kids as part of Family Day. Employees were invited to bring their children and display small projects. Lily showed up in a pale blue hoodie, hugging her laptop and a folder packed with handwritten notes. Her project title read, "An AI That Listens, a Companion for Quiet Souls." During her presentation, Lily was a little nervous. But when her eyes found her father standing at the back of the hall, one hand gently resting on an old wooden cane, a leftover from his construction days, her smile lit up with quiet confidence. When the host asked, "Lily, Who inspires you the most? She answered without hesitation, my dad. Because he doesn't need to prove he's smart, he just needs to do what's right. No one said anything after that, but many in the audience went still, fingers tightening around their coffee cups. Because in that small voice was something the tech world had long forgotten. Doing the right thing doesn't always look grand, but it changes everything. The world never lacked heroes. We just got used to looking for them under bright lights and forgot they might be standing quietly behind us, holding a mop. 1 year after Thomas Ray stepped onto Coltech's stage of honor, the company had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a river that silently shifts its course toward the light. Derek Cole, now known as one of the most human-centered CEOs in the East Coast tech scene, still walked the office floors every Monday morning. He stopped to chat, listened to feedback, even had lunch with the custodial crew, something he once considered unnecessary. On the fourth floor, the Human-Centered Technology Lab, a new department under Thomas's advisory, became a home for bold, practical ideas. No one called him the janitor anymore. But Thomas often joked, I still clean floors, just the ones in their minds now. He never accepted a director's salary. He only asked for a scholarship fund named after his wife, the Susan Ray Foundation, to support underprivileged students in tech. Lily, now 11, had just won the National Junior Coding Innovation Award. When asked by reporters what she wanted to be when she grew up, she simply said, I want to be a regular person, like my dad. A photo of her hugging Thomas after the ceremony went viral, not for any technical feat, but for the raw, quiet love it captured. On his last official day at Coltech, Thomas arrived early. No one knew. There was no farewell party. He just left a sticky note on the wall of his modest office. Never ignore the ones who speak softly. Never underestimate someone without a title. Smart tech can change the world, but kindness is what makes it worth living in. That note was framed and now hangs by the company's front door. And every year on that same day, the entire staff at Coltech holds a day of listening, a gathering where everyone, from the CEO to the security guards, from engineers to cafeteria workers, comes together for one purpose, to truly listen to one another. Thomas Ray left behind no invention with his name on it, no patents, no articles in tech journals. But he left something greater, a way of living, a quiet, kind way of living, powerful enough to shape an entire generation. He never needed fame, never needed a title. He just did the right thing and left behind a legacy no one could erase. Remember, real heroes don't need capes. Like, comment with your thoughts, and hit subscribe to join us, where ordinary stories become lifelong lessons.